At the Millionaire's lavish wedding, a cleaning lady suddenly appears to interrupt the ceremony. She carries proof of a dark scheme. The bride planned to poison the groom's mother to inherit everything. What was meant to be a fairy tale turns into a public nightmare. Nancy Smith's hands bore the marks of a lifetime of labor. At 55, each wrinkle told tales of houses she had cleaned, clothes she had washed, families she had served. In the mirror of the small Maid's bathroom, in the mansion in Bel Air, Los Angeles, she observed the whitish spots on her dark skin, the result of years of exposure to harsh cleaning products. "Today will be different," she murmured to herself, adjusting her impeccably ironed navy blue uniform. 3 months ago, her life had taken a turn when she was hired to work exclusively at the Morrison family mansion, one of the most traditional families on the west side of Los Angeles. Finishing pinning her graying hair into a tight bun, Nancy took a deep breath and stepped out for another day of work. The clock struck 6 in the morning as she crossed the extensive garden with its royal palms to the main house. The mansion, with its neoclassical features and large windows framing the view of Lake Hollywood, intimidated anyone who approached. But not Nancy. For her, it was just another place where dust accumulated and someone needed to clean. The difference, however, lay in whom she now served. Mrs. Celeste Morrison, an 82-year-old lady, was the real reason Nancy had accepted the job. A widow for over a decade, Mrs. Celeste lived alone in that mansion, with sporadic visits from her only son, Marcus Morrison, a real estate mogul who rarely had time for his mother. "Good morning, Mrs. Celeste. I brought your chamomile tea with a little honey." "Just the way you like it," Nancy announced, entering the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. The elderly woman, sitting in a burgundy velvet armchair near the window, smiled upon seeing Nancy. Her blue eyes, still lively despite her age, lit up. "Nancy, my dear, you are a blessing. I was just watching the birds in the garden and thinking that today we could make that orange cake you taught me." And so, week after week, Nancy and Mrs. Celeste built a relationship that transcended the professional. While cleaning the rooms, Nancy listened to Celeste's youth stories, the balls at the Beverly Wilshire, the trips to Europe, the marriage to the late Dr. Morrison. In return, she shared accounts of her childhood in rural Ohio, the difficulties she faced arriving in Los Angeles as a teenager, the 3 children she raised alone who now, as adults, rarely called. "You know, Nancy, before you arrived, I counted the hours. Now I count the stories," Mrs. Celeste confessed one afternoon, as the two flipped through an old photo album on the veranda. "You and I are alike, Mrs. Celeste, 2 women alone in the world. Only you have this whole house and I have my small room in the back," Nancy replied without resentment, merely stating a fact. "But you have something no money can buy, my dear. You have dignity and a generous heart." The routine of the 2 women soon settled into a comfortable rhythm. In the morning, after tea, Nancy helped Mrs. Celeste with her bath and change of clothes. Then, while the maid took care of the cleaning, the elderly woman read her novels or watched television shows. In the afternoon, they often cooked together or played cards on the veranda overlooking the garden. In the evening, after dinner, Nancy read aloud to Mrs. Celeste, whose vision was increasingly compromised. Marcus Morrison usually appeared once a week, always in a hurry, cell phone in hand, his attention divided between his mother and his business. Tall, with graying hair and blue eyes like his mother's, he was a man who commanded presence. A widower for 5 years, he dedicated himself exclusively to work, building a real estate empire that spread throughout Los Angeles. "Mom, I can't stay long today. I have a meeting with investors in half an hour," he often said, kissing his mother's forehead and leaving before coffee was even served. "He's a good son." "He just doesn't have time," Mrs. Celeste justified with a resigned sigh, as she watched her son leave. It was on one of those Sunday visits, 4 months after Nancy's arrival, that Marcus brought news. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he announced, with a smile that had not been seen on his face for a long time. "This is Lydia Rodriguez, my girlfriend." The woman who entered right behind him into the living room momentarily left Nancy breathless. Lydia was stunning, long black hair down to her waist, tanned skin and honey-colored eyes that seemed to assess every detail of the house. At 35, she was 23 years younger than Marcus. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Celeste. Marcus talked so much about you, Lydia said with a melodious voice, approaching to kiss the elderly woman's cheek. Something in Lydia's gaze made Nancy shiver. It was as if behind that perfect facade there was something cold, calculating. But perhaps it was just her imagination, she thought, pushing the feeling away as she served coffee to the visitors. "Nancy, bring another plate of cookies, will you?" Marcus asked, for the first time noticing the maid's presence. "As you wish, sir, but Mrs. Celeste cannot eat much sugar because of her diabetes," Nancy replied, remembering her employer's medical restrictions. Lydia shot an irritated glance at Nancy, as if the employee had committed a grave indiscretion. "I'm sure Mrs. Celeste can afford a little cookie on the day she meets her future daughter-in-law, can't she?" Lydia retorted, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The rest of the visit passed in a tense atmosphere. Mrs. Celeste, always polite, tried to keep the conversation going, while Lydia monopolized Marcus's attention, constantly touching him, laughing loudly at his jokes, and ignoring the elderly woman whenever possible. When the couple finally said goodbye, Nancy noticed that Mrs. Celeste's hands were trembling slightly. "Are you feeling well?" she asked, concerned. "I'm just tired, my dear. I think I'll lie down for a bit." That night, as she tidied the kitchen, Nancy heard Mrs. Celeste quietly crying in her room. Without making a sound, she approached the slightly ajar door. "May I come in, Mrs. Celeste?" The elderly woman nodded, wiping her tears with a hand-embroidered cotton handkerchief. "Oh, Nancy, I should be happy for Marcus, shouldn't I? He deserves a new start after so long alone. But that woman, there's something about her that makes me uneasy." Nancy sat on the edge of the bed and held Mrs. Celeste's thin, wrinkled hands in her own, rough and marked by work. Two different worlds united by loneliness and the mutual affection they had built. You've always had a good instinct for judging people. If something bothers you, perhaps it's worth paying attention. What neither of them imagined was that this visit would be just the beginning of a series of events that would forever transform the peaceful routine of the Morrison mansion. As Nancy turned off the lights in the room, leaving Mrs. Celeste asleep, she could not foresee that her loyalty to the elderly woman would be tested in ways she had never imagined. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. Lydia's visits to the mansion became increasingly frequent in the following weeks. She always arrived carrying bags from expensive stores, impeccable makeup, and a smile that Nancy began to notice transformed completely when Marcus left the room. One Thursday afternoon, Lydia appeared unannounced while Marcus was on a business trip to San Francisco. Nancy received her with surprise at the main door. "Good afternoon, Miss Lydia. Mr. Marcus is not here. He's away on business." Lydia rolled her eyes. "I know that, dear. I came to visit Mrs. Celeste. After all, we'll soon be family. We need to get to know each other better." The condescending tone made Nancy press her lips together, holding back a retort. She merely stepped aside and announced the visit. "Mrs. Celeste, Miss Lydia is here to see you." The elderly woman was in the music room, where she usually listened to her classical vinyl records. Upon seeing Lydia, she straightened up in the armchair and adjusted her shawl over her shoulders. "What a pleasant surprise, my dear. Marcus didn't mention your visit." "It was a last-minute thing," Lydia replied, sitting down uninvited. "I thought we could take the opportunity to discuss some adjustments to the house." Nancy, who was leaving the room, stopped upon hearing that. Mrs. Celeste gave the visitor a confused look. "Adjustments? What kind of adjustments?" Lydia smiled, tossing her hair back. "Oh, Mrs. Celeste, you must agree that this house, though beautiful, is a little outdated. When Marcus and I get married, and it won't be long, we'll need to modernize several things." Mrs. Celeste's face paled. "But this is my home. Every piece of furniture, every painting has a history. And histories are great for books, not for living in them," Lydia retorted with false sweetness. Then, noticing that Nancy was still nearby, her tone changed. "Nancy, dear, could you bring us some tea? And quickly, please. It's not your break time, is it?" Reluctantly, Nancy went to the kitchen to prepare the tea but left the door ajar to listen to the conversation. What she heard in the following minutes made her blood boil. "Mrs. Celeste, let's be direct. You are already at an advanced age. Wouldn't it be better to consider moving to a smaller, more practical house? Or perhaps one of those senior living residences, where you would have company of people your age. Mrs. Celeste's response was firm, despite her trembling voice. This house was built by my husband. We lived here for 50 years. This is where I intend to stay for the rest of my days. Of course, of course. Lydia hastened to agree, but her tone was that of someone speaking to a stubborn child. But we need to be practical. The second floor has so many steps. And you already fell once, didn't you? Marcus told me. Imagine if something more serious happens next time. When Nancy returned with the tea, she found Mrs. Celeste visibly shaken. Lydia, on the other hand, seemed pleased with herself. Ah, finally. I thought you had gone to pick the leaves in the garden, Lydia commented with disdain. After serving the tea, Nancy remained in the room, claiming she needed to dust the bookshelves. She did not trust leaving Mrs. Celeste alone with that woman. Nancy, you don't need to do that now, Lydia said, irritated. We are having a private conversation. I'm sorry, but I have to follow my schedule. Mr. Marcus likes everything to be in order when he returns from his trip, Nancy replied, with feigned subservience. For half an hour, Lydia continued her subtle offensive, suggesting changes to the decor, questioning the need for so many staff members, casually, mentioning how tired and confused Mrs. Celeste seemed lately. When she finally said goodbye, she left a brochure about senior living residences on the coffee table. Just for you to take a look, no obligation. Think about your family's well-being, Mrs. Celeste. As soon as the door closed behind Lydia, Mrs. Celeste picked up the brochure and crumpled it with surprising force for her frail hands. She wants to take me out of my own home. Nancy, she murmured with tears in her eyes. Does she think I don't notice what she's doing? Nancy sat beside her employer, holding her hands. You need to talk to Mr. Marcus. Tell him what's happening. Mrs. Celeste shook her head, resigned. My son is in love, Nancy. Men in love are blind. Besides, he has always been practical, objective. He'll think I'm exaggerating, or worse, that I'm becoming senile. That night, while helping Mrs. Celeste prepare for bed, Nancy made a decision. She would not just stand by and watch that woman destroy her employer's peace. Mrs. Celeste, do you trust me? The elderly woman smiled, caressing Nancy's face with tenderness. As I trust few people in this world, my dear. Then let me help you. I'll keep an eye on this Lydia. If she's plotting something, we'll find out. The following Sunday, Marcus appeared for lunch, accompanied by Lydia. The transformation in the young woman's behavior when he was present was impressive. Attention, smiles, courtesies, all directed not only at Marcus but also at Mrs. Celeste. I prepared a surprise for you, Lydia announced, handing a small package to Mrs. Celeste. A wonderful French anti-wrinkle cream. My dermatologist recommended it. Mrs. Celeste thanked her politely, although the gift was almost an offense to a woman her age. Nancy, serving dessert, noticed Lydia's gaze, a mix of triumph and disdain. Mom, I have news, Marcus said, holding Lydia's hand. We've decided to formalize our commitment. The engagement will be next month. Mrs. Celeste's smile froze. So soon? You've only known each other for 5 months. When you're sure. There's no need to wait, Marcus replied, kissing Lydia's hand. And the wedding will be early next year, Lydia added, displaying a diamond ring that made Nancy calculate how many years of salary it would take to buy it. We're thinking of doing some renovations to the house after the wedding, Marcus continued. Lydia has wonderful ideas to modernize this place. But son, this house, it will be our family home, Mom, Marcus interrupted firmly. Lydia will be my wife. It's natural for her to want to leave her mark here. The rest of the lunch passed in a tense atmosphere. Mrs. Celeste barely touched her dessert. After the couple left, she asked Nancy to take her to the garden, where she usually found peace among her roses. That woman will take over everything. Nancy, the house, my son, my life. Nancy knelt before Mrs. Celeste's chair. I won't let that happen, Mrs. Celeste, I promise. In the following weeks, Lydia's presence in the mansion became constant. She began to bring a decorator, an architect, making measurements and plans without even consulting Mrs. Celeste. When alone with the elderly woman, she made no effort to hide her contempt. This place is a dusty museum, she would comment. As soon as we get married, I'm going to completely transform it. Or don't you think you'd be happier in a nursing home? You'd have company, activities, people to take care of you 24 hours a day. One afternoon, Nancy caught Lydia rummaging through the drawers of Mrs. Celeste's office. When questioned, she replied with disconcerting nonchalance, "Just looking for some documents Marcus mentioned about the family business. Now that I'm going to be part of the Morrisons, I need to understand the business." Nancy decided it was time to act. One Wednesday, while Lydia was at the gym and Mrs. Celeste was resting, she went to Marcus's room and waited for him. When her employer arrived, he was surprised to find her there. "Any problem, Nancy?" "Mr. Morrison, forgive my intrusion, but I need to talk about something important." "It's about Miss Lydia and your mother." Marcus frowned. "What happened?" Nancy took a deep breath. "Miss Lydia doesn't treat your mother well when you're not present. She makes cruel comments, pressures her to move, rummages through her things without permission." Marcus's face hardened. "Are you implying that my fiancée mistreats my mother behind my back?" "I'm not implying, Mr. Morrison, I'm stating. I witnessed several situations." "That's absurd," he retorted. "Lydia is incapable of such a thing. She only wants the best for all of us, including Mom." "I understand it's hard to believe, but—" "Enough, Nancy," Marcus cut her off. "I appreciate your dedication to my mother, but I do not accept unfounded accusations against Lydia. She will be my wife. I suggest you focus on your duties and leave family matters to us." Nancy left the room, defeated but not surprised. She knew it would be difficult to convince Marcus. Men like him, accustomed to giving orders and not listening, rarely saw beyond what they wanted to see. But she would not give up. If Marcus didn't believe her, she would find other ways to protect Mrs. Celeste. What Nancy didn't expect was that, upon returning to her room in the back, she would find Lydia waiting for her, sitting on her bed, with a cold smile on her lips. "Trying to hurt me, Nancy? Big mistake. Very big." Nancy felt a shiver run down her spine as she saw Lydia in her room. The invasion of her only private space in the house was a clear demonstration of power. "How did you get in here?" she asked, keeping her voice firm despite her racing heart. Lydia twirled a key between her fingers. "I have access to everything in this house. Or did you think a simple maid's room would have any privacy?" Standing up with calculated movements, Lydia approached Nancy, even wearing low heels. She was taller than the maid, and made sure to use that to her advantage, looking down at her. "Did you really think Marcus would believe you instead of me? A little maid against the woman he loves?" Nancy stood firm. "I only told what I saw. What you do to Mrs. Celeste is not right." Lydia laughed, a cold sound that didn't match her beautiful face. "I'll be clear, Nancy. You have two options. Either you cooperate with me and keep your mouth shut, or you can look for another job. And believe me, I'll make sure you don't get references. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you a chance. Think carefully. With your salary here, you support— who was it again? Oh yes, your daughter in college and your sick mother in Ohio, right? It would be a shame if you had to give all that up because of an old lady who, let's face it, won't last much longer anyway." The mention of her family made Nancy feel a lump in her throat. How did Lydia know these details? Had she rummaged through her belongings? "What exactly do you want from Mrs. Celeste?" "From the Morrison family." Lydia smiled, walking around the small room and examining Nancy's few belongings with disdain. "That's none of your business. But if you insist, let's say I'm building my future. And in that future I see a beautiful mansion, a prosperous company and, well, a life without hindrances." The insinuation was clear. Mrs. Celeste was the hindrance. "Now," Lydia continued, "I hope we understand each other. Keep doing your job, stay out of my affairs, and we'll all benefit." When Lydia finally left, Nancy sat on her bed, trembling. The threat was real, and she knew the young woman had the power to carry it out. Her job at the Morrison mansion was the best she had gotten in years. Losing that position would mean compromising the future of her daughter Janice, who was studying nursing at UCLA, and the treatment of her mother, who suffered from heart problems. But abandoning Mrs. Celeste to her fate was also not an option. The elderly woman had become more than an employer. She was almost a friend, someone who treated her with respect and dignity, something rare in her life as a domestic worker. That night, Nancy barely slept. She needed a plan. If her word wasn't enough against Lydia's, she would need proof. And to get them, she would have to be smarter than her adversary. The next morning, during breakfast, Nancy noticed something different about Mrs. Celeste. She was more downcast than usual, with deep dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands. "Didn't you sleep well?" she asked as she served the tea. "I had nightmares, Nancy, and a bitter taste in my mouth when I woke up. It must be old age, isn't it? The body starts to fail. Something in—" Mrs. Celeste's resigned tone alarmed Nancy. It seemed almost as if the elderly woman was giving up. "Did you take any different medicine last night?" "Only what Lydia brought me. A special tea she said it would help with my insomnia." Nancy felt a chill. "Miss Lydia was here last night?" "I didn't see her come in. She arrived late after you had already retired. She said she was worried about me, that Marcus asked her to check on me." The story sounded false. Marcus was in Washington, D.C., closing a deal. Why would he ask Lydia to check on his mother when there were staff for that? And why so late? While Mrs. Celeste rested after breakfast, Nancy made a discreet inspection of the house. In the kitchen, she found a cup with residues of a dark liquid. She sniffed it. It wasn't ordinary tea, something stronger, bitter. She put the cup in a plastic bag and hid it in her room. Maybe she could find out what it contained. In the following weeks, Nancy began to closely monitor the interactions between Lydia and Mrs. Celeste. She noticed a pattern. Whenever Lydia prepared a drink for the elderly woman, she became confused, lethargic. The symptoms lasted a day or two, then diminished, until the next visit. "Mr. Morrison," Nancy approached her employer one morning as he had coffee before leaving for work. "I've noticed your mother has been confused lately. Perhaps it would be good to call the doctor." Marcus looked up from his newspaper. "Lydia mentioned that. I've already scheduled an appointment for next week." "She has shown these symptoms especially after Miss Lydia's visits," Nancy ventured. Marcus's gaze hardened. "We've talked about this, Nancy. I will not tolerate insinuations against my fiancée." "I'm not insinuating anything, sir. Just reporting what I observe, as you always asked me to do." Realizing she couldn't convince her employer, Nancy decided she needed outside help. Her cousin Rosalind worked as a nursing technician at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Perhaps she could identify what was in the cup. On a Sunday off, Nancy visited her cousin in her small apartment in Santa Monica. "I need your help, Rosalind. I think someone is giving Mrs. Celeste something. Something that makes her confused, disoriented." Rosalind examined the residues in the cup. "I can't be sure just by looking, Nancy. I would need to do a lab analysis." "Can you do that?" Her cousin hesitated. "It's risky. If I'm discovered, I could lose my job." "Please, Rosalind. I think that woman is trying to make Mrs. Celeste appear senile, incapable, so she can take control of the house, maybe even commit her against her will." Reluctantly, Rosalind agreed to try. "I'll see what I can do, but it will take a few days." Back at the mansion, Nancy found Mrs. Celeste sitting in the garden, looking at her roses with a distant gaze. She approached silently and sat beside her. "You know, Nancy," the elderly woman began, without diverting her gaze from the flowers, "when my husband was alive, he used to say that people are like these roses. Some have thorns to protect themselves, others display their beauty defenselessly, but all without exception need care to flourish." Nancy waited, sensing there was more to be said. "Lydia doesn't like me," Mrs. Celeste continued, with a lucidity that surprised Nancy. "It's not just an impression. She hates me. I see it in her eyes when she thinks I'm not paying attention. Did you talk to Mr. Marcus about this?" Mrs. Celeste smiled sadly. "My son is in love, blind, and maybe he's also tired of me, of the responsibility. I'm a burden to him." "Don't say that, Mrs. Celeste. You are his mother. He loves you." "In his own way, yes. Marcus has always been practical. He sees the world in terms of problems and solutions, and an elderly mother who needs increasing care. I'm a problem without an easy solution." Mrs. Celeste's words weighed on Nancy throughout the day. At night, as she tidied her employer's room, she noticed a small bottle of pills on the bedside table. She didn't recognize the name of the medication. "What medicine is this, Mrs. Celeste? Did Dr. Oliver prescribe it?" The elderly woman frowned. "I don't remember. Lydia said the doctor sent it. For sleeping, I think." Nancy picked up the bottle and examined it. There was no prescription attached, no leaflet. Just white pills in an unlabeled bottle. "I'll keep this if you don't mind. And tomorrow we'll call Dr. Oliver to confirm." Mrs. Celeste agreed, seemingly relieved not to have to take the mysterious pills. The next morning, Nancy called the family doctor. "Dr. Oliver? This is Nancy, from Mrs. Celeste Morrison's house. I'd like to confirm if you recently prescribed any medication for her." "For sleeping." The doctor's response confirmed her suspicions. "No, Nancy. The last consultation was almost 2 months ago and I didn't prescribe anything new. Is there a problem?" "Perhaps, doctor. Mrs. Celeste has been confused with tremors, and I found a medicine that you supposedly prescribed. That's serious. I'll come over today to examine her." When she hung up the phone, Nancy felt a presence behind her. She turned and found Lydia, with her arms crossed and a furious expression on her face. "Eavesdropping on phone conversations, Nancy. Calling doctors without authorization. That's grounds for dismissal for just cause." "It was Mrs. Celeste who asked me to call," Nancy lied, trying to protect herself. "She was confused about the medicines." "Of course she was. The poor lady has been so forgetful lately. Perhaps it's time to consider more specialized care, don't you think?" Lydia's falsely concerned tone made Nancy feel nauseous. "Dr. Oliver will examine her today. He'll know what to do." Lydia's smile wavered for an instant. "Unfortunately, we'll have to reschedule that visit. Marcus and I decided to take Mrs. Celeste for lunch in Santa Barbara today. An outing will do her good. But the doctor... I've already told Marcus about your GI initiative. He wasn't pleased at all. Nancy, after all, who decides about Mrs. Celeste's medical care is the family, not the maid." That afternoon, as the trio left for the supposed lunch, Nancy took the opportunity to do something she never imagined: search Lydia's room. She knew she was risking her job, perhaps even a criminal accusation, but Mrs. Celeste's health was worth the risk. In the closet of the guest suite that Lydia occupied, behind a pile of designer shoeboxes, she found a small briefcase. Inside, several bottles of medication, some with names she recognized from her experience caring for the elderly, others completely unknown. There were also syringes and ampules of a clear liquid. Nancy photographed everything with her simple cell phone. As she put the briefcase back in place, she heard a noise. Someone was in the room. "Looking for something, Nancy?" It was Rodney, Lydia's friend who sometimes accompanied her on visits, a pale man with an unsettling expression, who supposedly worked as a financial advisor. "Just tidying the room as always," Nancy replied, trying to sound natural. Of course, Rodney smiled, not believing her. "You know, Nancy, Lydia told me about you. The nosy maid who doesn't know her place." He approached menacingly. "If I were you, I'd stay away from Lydia's affairs. Very far away. Not everyone has her patience." When Rodney finally left, Nancy took a deep breath, trembling. Things were getting more and more dangerous. She needed to act fast before something irreversible happened to Mrs. Celeste. 3 days later, Rosalind called Nancy with alarming news. "Nancy, I managed to analyze those residues. There are benzodiazepines in high concentration, mixed with something that seems to be a strong antipsychotic." "In plain English, Rosalind, what does that mean?" "It means someone is giving Mrs. Celeste a dangerous mixture of potent sedatives with drugs to treat severe mental disorders. In an elderly person, this can cause confusion, memory loss, dizziness, falls. Exactly the symptoms you described." Nancy felt a chill. "And if she keeps taking this?" "It can have serious consequences. Permanent cognitive damage, heart problems, even—" Rosalind didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Nancy understood what was at stake. "I need a report, Rosalind. Something official to prove this." "Nancy, I can't. It would be unethical, illegal. I used hospital equipment without authorization. And if someone is trying to seriously harm Mrs. Celeste, isn't that also illegal?" After much insistence, Rosalind agreed to provide a written analysis, without the hospital's letterhead, merely detailing the components found in the sample. When Nancy returned to the mansion that night, she found a tense atmosphere. Mrs. Celeste was in bed, pale and subdued. Marcus paced the hallway, worried. "What happened?" Nancy asked, alarmed. "Mom fell in the bathroom," Marcus explained. "Lydia found her and called the ambulance. Fortunately, it was just a scare, nothing broken. But the doctor said she's very weak, dehydrated." Nancy entered the room. Mrs. Celeste was asleep with a bandage on her forehead. Lydia was sitting beside the bed, holding the elderly woman's hand with feigned concern. When she saw Nancy, her face took on an expression of veiled triumph. "Oh, Nancy, so glad you're here." "It was horrible. I came to bring Mrs. Celeste some tea and found her fallen. She must have slipped, poor thing. Increasingly fragile." Marcus entered the room, running a hand through his graying hair. "The doctor suggested a 24-hour nursing aid," he informed. "Someone specialized in the elderly." "But I take good care of Mrs. Celeste," Nancy protested. "There have never been problems before. I'm not saying you don't do a good job, Nancy, but you can't be everywhere at once. And Mom needs medical care now, not just domestic." "Actually," Lydia interjected, "I've been researching some senior living options. Places with complete medical infrastructure. Perhaps it's time to consider—" "No," Nancy exclaimed louder than she intended. "Forgive me, Mr. Morrison, but your mother loves this house. It would be traumatic to remove her from the place where she has lived her entire life." Marcus seemed divided. "Let's think about this calmly. For now, I'll hire the nurse. And Nancy, please prepare the downstairs guest room. It will be better for Mum not to have to climb stairs for a while." When Marcus left, Lydia approached Nancy, whispering, "You're losing, little maid. Soon Mrs. Celeste will be in a clinic, and you'll be looking for another job." Before Nancy could respond, Mrs. Celeste stirred in bed, mumbling something. The two women approached. "What is it, Mom?" Lydia asked, loud enough for Marcus to hear from the living room. "Do you need anything?" Mrs. Celeste opened her eyes, focusing with difficulty. When she saw Nancy, she extended her hand tremblingly. "Nancy, she pushed me," she whispered. "In the bathroom. Said I was a nuisance." Lydia paled for an instant, but soon regained her composure. "Poor thing, she's delirious. The doctor said this could happen because of the medication." Nancy held Mrs. Celeste's hand firmly. "I'll take care of you, Mrs. Celeste. I won't let anything bad happen." When Lydia went to call Marcus, Mrs. Celeste pulled Nancy closer. "I'm not crazy, Nancy. She pushed me. Said accidents happen to the elderly all the time. I believe you. I'll protect you, I promise." From that day on, Nancy did not leave Mrs. Celeste's side. She slept on a cot beside her employer's bed, personally checked all food and drink, and accompanied every medical visit. The hired nurse, Deborah, was a serious and competent young woman who soon realized that something strange was happening in the mansion. "Nancy, can I speak to you privately?" Deborah asked on the third day while Mrs. Celeste slept. In the garden, away from prying ears, the nurse revealed her suspicions. "Mrs. Celeste's symptoms don't match her medical history. She shows signs of someone being improperly medicated. Do you know anything?" Nancy hesitated, but decided to trust the professional. "I think Mr. Morrison's fiancée is giving Mrs. Celeste sedatives without a prescription. I even have an informal report analyzing residues from a cup." Deborah frowned. "This is extremely serious. It could be a crime. We need to inform Mr. Morrison. I've tried. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm jealous or making things up." "What about the police?" "Without concrete evidence, it would be my word against Lydia's, and she's the fiancée of the owner of the house. I'm just the maid." Deborah pondered for a moment. "I'll help you monitor. As a nurse, I can collect blood samples for tests and justify it as medical follow-up. If we find abnormal levels of medication, we'll have more concrete proof." The alliance between Nancy and Deborah brought some relief. Together, they maintained constant vigilance over Mrs. Celeste, who began to gradually improve as she no longer received the suspicious mixtures. Lydia, realizing the barrier the two women formed, changed her strategy. She began to spend more time with Marcus outside the mansion, convincing him to travel, to go out on weekends. And she accelerated the wedding preparations. "I want a special ceremony with few guests, but very elegant," she commented during dinner. "Perhaps in the mansion's garden among Mrs. Celeste's roses." The elderly woman, who was already recovering her strength, smiled sadly. "My husband and I got married in this garden over 50 years ago. A family tradition, then. All the more reason for us to follow the same path," Lydia replied with false enthusiasm. After dinner, while Nancy helped Mrs. Celeste with her bath, the elderly woman confessed, "She wants to erase my presence, my history, use the setting of my memories to create hers. She won't succeed, Mrs. Celeste. You're getting better every day, thanks to you and Deborah. But I'm afraid, Nancy, Lydia won't give up easily." Mrs. Celeste's words proved prophetic. The next morning, Lydia appeared with a lawyer, introduced as a real estate law specialist. "Mr. Morrison, I analyzed the mansion's documentation," the man explained as everyone had coffee on the veranda. "As we agreed, I drafted a living donation contract transferring the property to your name, with lifelong usufruct for Mrs. Celeste, of course." Marcus seemed surprised. "I don't recall us agreeing to that, Mr. Paul." Lydia quickly intervened. "Darling, we talked about this last week, remember? It's just a formality to ensure everything is well organized before the wedding." Mrs. Celeste straightened in her chair with a firmness that surprised everyone. "This house is in my name, Mr. Paul. My husband left it to me, and I do not intend to transfer it to anyone while I am alive." The lawyer seemed embarrassed. "Certainly, Mrs. Celeste. The decision is entirely yours." Lydia couldn't hide her frustration. "Mrs. Celeste, it's just a measure to protect the family's assets. No one is taking anything from you." "It's not necessary," the elderly woman replied with dignity. "I already have my will in order. Marcus will receive everything that is rightfully his when I pass." A tense silence fell over the table. Marcus, visibly uncomfortable, tried to appease the situation. "Mom is right. There's no rush for these formalities. Mr. Paul, I appreciate your visit, but I don't think it will be necessary for now." When the lawyer left, Lydia accompanied him to the door, talking in a low voice. Nancy, who was serving more coffee, couldn't hear what they were saying. But Lydia's displeased expression said it all. That afternoon, while organizing the laundry room, Nancy heard agitated voices coming from the office. She approached the slightly ajar door silently. "We need that transfer, Marcus," Lydia was saying, her sweet tone completely abandoned. "You know the construction company's situation. Investors are threatening to withdraw their support. I won't pressure my mother, Lydia. The house is hers. It's the only debt-free asset you have. If we don't offer solid collateral, everything will collapse. Your empire, our life together, everything." Nancy moved away, processing what she had just heard. So that was it. Marcus was in financial trouble. And the mansion, his mother's debt-free property, was the salvation for his businesses. At night, she shared the discovery with Deborah. "That explains a lot," the nurse commented. "But it doesn't justify what Lydia is doing to Mrs. Celeste." "I think the plan is darker than we imagined," Nancy replied. "Lydia doesn't just want Mrs. Celeste to be institutionalized. She wants the lady to appear incapacitated, so Marcus can legally assume her assets. Or worse." Deborah shivered. "We need to find the will. There might be a clause that explains Lydia's rush to marry Marcus." The next day, while Mrs. Celeste rested after lunch, Nancy and Deborah discreetly searched the office. At the back of a locked drawer, which Nancy opened with an unfolded paperclip, a skill learned in her poor childhood, they found a folder with legal documents. "I found it," Deborah whispered, leafing through the will. "Look at this. There's a specific clause about new marriages." Nancy read over the nurse's shoulder, struggling with the legal terms, but understanding the essential. If Marcus remarried, his wife would not be entitled to the inheritance left by Mrs. Celeste, including the mansion. The property would be in usufruct for Marcus, but after his death, it would be donated to a charity that cared for children with cancer, a project Dr. Morrison had supported during his lifetime. "So that's why," Nancy exclaimed. "If Mrs. Celeste, if something happens to her before the wedding, Marcus inherits everything without restrictions. After he gets married, the clause takes effect." "We need to make a copy of this document," Deborah decided. "Have you found what you were looking for?" The two women froze. Rodney was standing at the door with a malevolent smile. Behind him, Lydia watched the scene with fury in her eyes. "Cleaning the office, Nancy. Or should I say private investigation?" Nancy stood up, facing the two. "We know what you're trying to do to Mrs. Celeste, and we won't allow it." Lydia entered the room, closing the door behind her. "I don't think you understand your position in this house. You are employees, easily replaceable. Especially you, Nancy. I've already informed Marcus that you've been stealing small objects from the house. He's very disappointed." "That's a lie." "Kaisu, your word against mine, and I have proof." "Rodney, show them." The man took a small gold brooch with diamonds from his pocket. "Found in your room, Nancy, among your things." "I've never seen that before." "You planted it." Lydia smiled coldly. "Who will believe you?" The envious maid who can't stand to see her employer happy with another woman. Pathetic. Deborah stepped forward. I believe her, and I have medical training. I can recognize when a patient is being drugged. I also have a solution for you, nurse, Lydia retorted. Medical negligence. After all, it was under your care that Mrs. Celeste fell again yesterday, wasn't it? She didn't fall yesterday, Deborah contested, confused. Yes, she did. Marcus and I found her on the floor of her room, disoriented. You were supposed to be on duty, but, inexplicably, left without warning. I had to administer first aid myself. The two employees realized the trap closing around them. Lydia had planned everything meticulously. What do you want from us? Nancy asked, feeling cornered. It's simple, Lydia replied. Deborah will resign today, citing personal problems. You, Nancy, will continue working as if nothing happened, but away from Mrs. Celeste. You will only take care of the general cleaning of the house. And if we refuse? Rodney approached menacingly. Then Marcus will find not only the brooch in your room, but also stolen medicines from Mrs. Celeste's stock. Drugs that would perfectly explain the lady's confused state lately. Cornered, Nancy and Deborah exchanged desperate glances. The net was closing and Mrs. Celeste was becoming increasingly vulnerable. That night, Nancy barely slept. The situation seemed desperate. As agreed, Deborah had resigned, citing family problems. Marcus, though surprised by the nurse's sudden departure, accepted without much questioning. Lydia, of course, already had a trusted replacement to recommend. Marilyn is a nurse at the hospital where my aunt was treated, Lydia explained during dinner. She has experience with elderly patients and is available to start immediately. Nancy watched the scene with a heavy heart. Mrs. Celeste, sitting at the table with a dejected expression, seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. Her eyes, once lively and attentive, now wandered unfocused. Occasionally she looked at Nancy with a silent plea that broke the maid's heart. The new nurse, Marilyn, arrived the next morning. She was a middle-aged woman with a severe appearance and abrupt movements. Nancy immediately realized that she and Lydia had some kind of agreement. The familiarity between the two went beyond a simple professional recommendation. Nancy will only be responsible for the general cleaning of the house, Lydia instructed as she showed Marilyn around the facilities. You will exclusively care for Mrs. Celeste, feeding, medication, bathing, everything. Understood, Marilyn replied, with a look of complicity. Kept away from Mrs. Celeste, Nancy had to be creative to maintain contact with the elderly woman. She took advantage of moments when Marilyn left for her lunch break or when Lydia was out of the mansion. In these brief encounters, she noticed that Mrs. Celeste was increasingly lethargic, speaking little, often confused about who Nancy was. They're giving me something. Nancy, Mrs. Celeste whispered one afternoon, when they managed a few minutes alone. Medicines that make me dizzy, confused. I can't think straight. I'll get you out of here, Mrs. Celeste, I promise. My will, in the office. Marcus can't. The conversation was interrupted by Marilyn's arrival, who gave Nancy a suspicious look. What are you doing here? I thought you were cleaning the pool area. Just came to get a cloth I forgot, Nancy improvised, leaving quickly. Each passing day, the situation worsened. Marcus, absorbed in his financial problems, visited his mother less frequently. Lydia, on the other hand, was always present, supervising medication, talking to doctors, consolidating her image as a dedicated daughter-in-law. The wedding was scheduled for 2 weeks from then, an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, followed by an exclusive reception for a few selected guests. Time was running out. One Thursday, while cleaning the hallway near Mrs. Celeste's room, Nancy overheard a conversation between Lydia and Rodney. It's taking too long, Rodney said impatiently. Investors are pressuring Marcus. If we don't resolve this soon, the whole plan will fall apart. Calm down, Lydia replied. Marilyn is gradually increasing the dosage. We can't risk raising suspicions. 1 or 2 days before the wedding, we'll deliver the final blow. Like last time? Just know that was amateurish. I learned from my mistakes. Now it will be something more natural. A cardiac complication during sleep. Common in people her age. Nancy covered her mouth to stifle a scream. The plan was more sinister than she had imagined. It wasn't just about mentally incapacitating Mrs. Celeste, but something much worse. She needed to act, and fast. That same night, when everyone was asleep, Nancy used her key to silently enter Mrs. Celeste's room. The elderly woman slept restlessly, murmuring disconnected words. On the bedside table, a prepared syringe awaited the time of application. Carefully, Nancy collected the syringe in a plastic bag. She replaced it with an ampule of saline solution that she had obtained from Deborah before her departure. With luck, no one would notice the difference until the next day. In her room, she examined the contents of the syringe. The liquid was transparent without a distinct smell. It could be anything. She needed help identifying it. Rosalind was her only hope. The next morning, using the excuse of going to the market to buy cleaning products, Nancy left the mansion and went straight to the hospital where her cousin worked. Nancy, "This is crazy," Rosalind protested when she saw the syringe. "I can't just analyze this in the hospital lab." "First, please, Rosalind. It's a matter of life or death. That woman is planning something terrible against Mrs. Celeste." After much insistence, Rosalind agreed to ask a lab friend to examine the contents, unofficially. "It will take at least a day, and if it's what you suspect, you should go to the police. Without concrete evidence, I'll just be the resentful maid making up stories about the perfect daughter-in-law." Back at the mansion, Nancy found an agitated atmosphere. Marilyn was standing in the living room talking excitedly with Lydia. "The syringe is gone. And the insulin vial too," the nurse said, visibly nervous. Lydia shot a furious glance at Nancy as soon as she saw her enter. "Where have you been?" "To at the market, as you asked." "The products are here," Nancy replied, raising the bags. "Marilyn says there are missing medications from Mrs. Celeste's stock. Do you know anything about this?" "Yes, no, madam." "How could I? It's been weeks since I took care of Mrs. Celeste." Lydia narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "I'm going to search your room." "Go ahead," Nancy challenged, knowing they wouldn't find anything there. The syringe was with Rosalind. That afternoon was tense. Lydia stayed nearby, observing Nancy's every move. Marilyn locked the medicine cabinet with a new key, and Mrs. Celeste, oblivious to everything, remained lying down, increasingly weak and disoriented. The next day, Rosalind called. Nancy answered with her heart in her mouth. "Nancy, it's worse than we imagined. The syringe contained a massive dose of insulin, enough to cause a fatal hypoglycemic shock in anyone, especially a debilitated elderly person." The confirmation of the macabre plan left Nancy breathless. "What do I do, Rosalind?" "Go to the police immediately. This is attempted murder." "And the proof?" "My friend at the lab will prepare an unofficial report. It has no legal value, but it can serve to initiate an investigation." Nancy pondered her options. Going to the police was risky. Her word against Lydia's, a rich, articulate, convincing woman. She needed more evidence, something that would leave no doubt about Marcus's fiancée's intentions. That night, after everyone had retired, Nancy did something desperate. She broke into Marcus's office to look for the original will and make a copy. As she rummaged through the files, she heard voices in the hallway. She quickly hid behind a heavy curtain. Lydia and Rodney entered the office, closing the door behind them. "I'm sure it was that nosy maid," Lydia said, furious. "She took the syringe and probably already knows what was inside." "We need to get rid of her," Rodney suggested. "Firing her isn't enough. She knows too much. Don't be an idiot. A missing maid would draw more attention than we want now." "No, we'll stick to the plan. On the wedding day, during the ceremony, you take Mrs. Celeste to rest and administer the dose. When they find out, we'll be exchanging rings with witnesses to our whereabouts." "What if it doesn't work?" "It will work. It worked with that old man in Denver, didn't it?" No one suspected a thing. Nancy's blood ran cold. It wasn't the first time. Lydia had done this before. "And then?" Rodney asked. "Then the Morrison fortune will be ours. Marcus has no idea how rich his mother is. Besides the mansion, there are investments, works of art, family jewels, a considerable inheritance to save his businesses and secure our future." "Our?" Rodney questioned with a touch of jealousy. Lydia chuckled softly. "Of course, darling. It was always our plan. Marcus is just a means to an end. After a few years, when everything is legally secured, well, accidents happen to everyone, don't they?" Nancy held her breath, barely believing what she was hearing. The plan was even more diabolical than she imagined. Lydia intended not only to eliminate Mrs. Celeste, but also Marcus eventually. After the couple left, Nancy stood motionless for a few minutes, assimilating the gravity of the situation. Finally, with trembling hands, she located the will and photographed it with her cell phone. In the next 2 days, Nancy devised a plan. Rosalind obtained the report on the insulin. Deborah, though no longer working at the mansion, agreed to help, providing a statement about her suspicions of improper medication. One definitive piece of evidence was still missing, something that would capture Lydia admitting her plans in her own words. For this, Nancy bought a small digital recorder, like those used by students to record lectures. On Sunday, the eve of the wedding, the entire mansion was abuzz with preparations. Floral arrangements, catering teams, decorators. The house had never been so full, and paradoxically, it was the perfect time to act discreetly. Nancy hid the recorder under a sofa cushion in the living room, where Lydia usually met Rodney for private conversations. Then she sent an anonymous message to Lydia's cell phone. "I know about the plan for the old lady. I want in. Meet me in the main living room in 20 minutes. Observing from afar, Nancy saw Lydia read the message, frown, and head to the living room. Minutes later, Rodney also appeared. Agitated, the two talked in low voices, trying to find out who had sent the message. It must be one of the temporary staff, Lydia assumed. Someone who overheard our conversations and wants a slice of the pie. Or it could be a trap, Rodney warned. What if it's the police? Don't be paranoid. The police don't use methods like this. Besides, who would believe accusations against us? We are respectable. I have an alibi for everything. For over half an hour, the two discussed possibilities, reviewed their plans in detail, mentioned the accident in Denver, and confirmed the strategy for the next day. Without realizing it, they confessed everything, and the recorder captured every word. When they finally left, Nancy retrieved the device, her hands trembling with emotion. They had the recorded confession. The last piece of the puzzle was in place. That night, as the mansion fell silent, Nancy went to Mrs. Celeste's room. The elderly woman was awake, looking out the window at the moonlit garden. "Tomorrow is the big day," Mrs. Celeste murmured. "My son's wedding. Mrs. Celeste, I need you to be strong. Something important will happen tomorrow, and you need to trust me." The elderly woman turned, a flash of lucidity in her gaze. "You found something, didn't you? About Lydia?" Nancy nodded, holding her employer's hands. "She's not who she appears to be. And tomorrow everyone will know the truth." A small smile formed on Mrs. Celeste's lips. "I always knew you were more than a maid, Nancy. You are my protector, my friend." The two women remained hand in hand, watching the moon rise through the window. The next day would be decisive for both of them, for the entire Morrison family, and for the future of the mansion that had witnessed so many stories over the decades. On the morning of the wedding, Nancy woke up early, her heart pounding with the adrenaline of what she was about to do. Her plan was risky, but it was the only chance to save Mrs. Celeste and expose Lydia before it was too late. The evidence was gathered. The report on the insulin, Deborah's statement, the photos of the will, and most importantly, the incriminating recording. As the sun rose over Bel Air, casting golden rays through the royal palms, Nancy prepared for the confrontation that would forever change the fate of everyone in the Morrison mansion. The Morrison mansion's garden had transformed into a fairy tale setting. Arches of white flowers marked the path to the improvised altar. Chairs covered in fine fabrics were arranged in perfect rows. A small chamber orchestra tuned its instruments under a pergola, all according to Lydia's wishes, who had spared no detail. Nancy observed the final preparations with a mixture of apprehension and determination. She had everything ready: the recorder with the confession, the report on the insulin, Deborah's statement. Only the execution of the plan remained. Rosalind and Deborah would arrive soon as secret guests. A distant cousin of Marcus, whom Lydia had never met, had given them her invitations. The guests were few, about 50 people, most connected to Marcus's business or Lydia's social circle. In the master bedroom, temporarily transformed into a beauty salon, Lydia tried on her wedding dress, an exclusive creation in Italian silk, with French lace details. She looked like the image of the perfect bride, radiant and happy. "Nancy, bring more water for the makeup artist," she ordered, without even looking at the maid. Her tone was that of someone who already considered herself the absolute mistress of the house. Downstairs, Mrs. Celeste was being prepared for the ceremony by Marilyn. The elderly woman would wear a light blue ensemble, chosen by Lydia, evidently to highlight her paleness and fragile appearance. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Celeste?" Nancy asked, entering the room on some pretext. The elderly woman looked at her with hazy eyes, but there was a flicker of recognition. "Nervous," she murmured. "Something important is happening today, isn't it?" "Something you're going to do." "Yes, madam. Do you remember what we talked about? Today the truth will come out." Marilyn gave them a suspicious look. "What are you whispering about?" "Mrs. Celeste needs to rest before the ceremony." "I was just asking if she needed anything," Nancy replied, leaving quickly. The first guests began to arrive. Nancy recognized some: Marcus's partners, distant cousins, Lydia's friends. All elegant, rehearsed smiles, superficial conversations. At 2 in the afternoon, Rosalind and Deborah arrived, disguised with elegant hats and dark glasses. Nancy met them briefly in the kitchen, away from curious eyes. "Is everything ready?" Deborah asked. Nancy nodded. "The sound technician is a friend of Mrs. Mary's son, who works in the laundry. He'll let me use the microphone at the right time. The important thing is for you two to stay close to Mrs. Celeste at all times. Don't let Marilyn administer anything to her." The plan was risky. Nancy would interrupt the ceremony at the critical moment, when the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union. She would present the evidence, play the recording. It was cinematic, perhaps melodramatic, but effective in exposing Lydia before everyone. At 4 in the afternoon, the guests were seated. The small orchestra began to play Pachelbel's canon. Marcus waited at the altar, elegant in his Italian suit, anxious and visibly emotional. Mrs. Celeste was escorted to the front row by Rodney, a choice that made Nancy shiver. Lydia's accomplice was in charge of the elderly woman precisely during the ceremony, according to the plan Nancy had overheard. Fortunately, Rosalind sat strategically beside Mrs. Celeste, and Deborah right behind, both vigilant. Finally, the wedding march announced Lydia's entrance. Dazzling, she walked down the white carpet spread over the grass, holding a bouquet of white roses and orchids. Her smile was radiant, the smile of someone who was minutes away from achieving everything she had planned. The officiant began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and family. Nancy, positioned near the sound equipment, felt her heart pound against her chest. Every minute that passed was 1 minute less for Mrs. Celeste. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Rodney discreetly checking his watch. She also saw Marilyn, the fake nurse, approaching from behind, as if to check if the elderly woman was well. In her hand something small gleamed, a syringe. It was now or never. "If anyone knows any impediment to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," the officiant pronounced. Following the ritual, Nancy stepped forward, taking the microphone from the sound technician's hands. "I object to this marriage." A shocked murmur ran through the audience. Marcus looked stunned. Lydia turned, her face contorted in a mixture of surprise and fury. "This woman," Nancy continued, pointing at Lydia, "is not who everyone thinks. She has planned something terrible against Mrs. Celeste." "Get this lunatic out of here," Lydia screamed. "Marcus, it's that troublesome maid I told you about." But Nancy did not back down. She signaled to Deborah, who quickly activated a laptop connected to the sound system. Lydia's voice echoed through the garden. "On the wedding day, during the ceremony, you take Mrs. Celeste to rest and administer the dose. When they find out, we'll be exchanging rings with witnesses to our whereabouts." The guests fell into absolute silence. Then came Rodney's voice. "What if it doesn't work?" And Lydia's damning response, "It will work. It worked with that old man in Denver, didn't it?" No one suspected a thing. Lydia paled. Her eyes, now cold as ice, fixed on Nancy with pure hatred. "This is a setup. A fabrication. This maid is obsessed. She's jealous of me." But Nancy was not finished. She made another signal, and Rosalind stood up, holding the syringe she had just taken from Marilyn's hands. "This syringe contains a lethal dose of insulin," Nancy explained. "The same substance found in another syringe I collected days ago, and which was analyzed by a laboratory. The report is here." She held up the documents for everyone to see. "Ms. Lydia has been administering unprescribed medications to Mrs. Celeste, leaving her confused, debilitated, all to make her appear senile, incapable of managing her own assets." Marcus, finally emerging from his state of shock, approached. "What are you saying, Nancy?" "The truth, Mr. Morrison. Your fiancé was planning to seriously harm your mother during the wedding ceremony. And the reason is here." She handed him the copy of the will with the highlighted clause. "If you married Lydia, she would not be entitled to Mrs. Celeste's inheritance. But if something happened to your mother before the wedding, you would inherit everything without restrictions." A growing murmur took over the guests. Some were already standing, shocked. Others pulled out cell phones to record the scene. "And that's not all," Nancy continued, as Marcus read the document with a stunned expression. "In the recording, Ms. Lydia suggests that her plans didn't stop there. After the financial situation was stabilized, you too would become dispensable." By this point, Rodney was trying to discreetly slip out of the garden. He was intercepted by two guests, a retired detective, a friend of the Morrison family, and his son, a police officer. Lydia, seeing her plan crumble, changed tactics. She threw her bouquet on the ground and advanced towards Marcus, tears welling in her eyes. "Darling, don't believe this. It's a conspiracy against us, against our happiness. This maid has always been jealous, always wanted to harm me." Marcus looked from his fiancée to Nancy, confused. It was then that Mrs. Celeste stood up, with surprising firmness. She walked slowly to her son and took his hands. "Marcus, my son, Nancy is telling the truth. Lydia has been mistreating me when you are not present. She has been giving me medicines that leave me confused, disoriented. I tried to tell you, but I never found the right words, the necessary lucidity." Marcus's expression changed, from confusion to understanding, and finally to fury. He turned to Lydia, who was still trying to maintain the facade of an unjustly accused bride. "Is it true? You plan to harm my mother? Answer me." "Marcus, you don't understand. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. Your company is sinking in debt. I just wanted to help us ensure our future." The inadvertent confession silenced the garden. Lydia, realizing what she had just admitted, covered her mouth with her hands. "Security," Marcus called, his voice trembling. "Please escort Miss Lydia and her friend out, and call the police." The rest of the afternoon was chaotic. Guests dispersed, shocked and speechless at the scandal. Police officers arrived to take statements. The syringe was seized as evidence, along with the medications found in Lydia's and Marilyn's rooms. When the mansion finally fell silent, it was already night. Nancy found Marcus and Mrs. Celeste sitting on the veranda, looking out at the garden where, hours earlier, a tragedy disguised as a celebration had almost occurred. "Nancy," Marcus called when he saw her pass, "come sit with us." Hesitantly, the maid approached. "I have no words to thank you for what you did today," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved my mother, and you probably saved me too." Mrs. Celeste extended her hand, holding Nancy's. "I always knew you were special, my dear. From the first day. I only did what any decent person would do, Mrs. Celeste." "No," Marcus interjected. "You risked your job, your reputation. Few would have that courage." There was a moment of contemplative silence as the three watched the moon rise from behind the garden trees. "Nancy," Marcus continued, "I want to offer you something. A way to repay you, although nothing can truly compensate for what you did for our family." The maid waited, curious. "I know your daughter studies nursing at UCLA. I want to offer her a full scholarship, including materials, housing, and a monthly stipend. And when she graduates, a guaranteed job at the clinic we are building in Malibu." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Morrison, that's not all," Mrs. Celeste interrupted. "Nancy, you showed that you are not just an employee, but part of our family. Therefore, I want you to accept the apartment we have in Santa Monica. It's small but well located, and it will be yours." Nancy couldn't hold back her tears. After a lifetime of hard work, calloused hands, and postponed dreams, she finally saw a different horizon opening, for her and for her daughter. "And there's more," Mrs. Celeste added with an enigmatic smile. "Remember how you always wanted to study? The college you could never attend. Well, it's never too late. I've already spoken with the dean of USC, an old friend. You start next semester. Study? But what?" "Geriatric nursing," the elderly woman replied with a twinkle in her eye. "After all, you have a natural talent for caring for stubborn old people like me." 3 months later, the Morrison mansion breathed again. The garden, once the scene of a near tragedy, returned to being a place of peace and beauty. Mrs. Celeste, fully recovered, spent her afternoons among her roses, often accompanied by Nancy, who now lived in the Santa Monica apartment but visited daily. Lydia and Rodney faced criminal charges, aggravated by the discovery that the accident in Denver they mentioned in the recording had, in fact, occurred. A wealthy elderly man, Lydia's fiancé at the time, had suffered a fatal hypoglycemic crisis weeks before their wedding. Authorities had reopened the case. Marcus, after the initial shock, immersed himself in a process of rebuilding his businesses, which were indeed in difficulty, but primarily his relationship with his mother. He now spent more time at the mansion, regularly dined with Mrs. Celeste, and had even learned to appreciate gardening. As for Nancy, her life had completely transformed. At 55, she was a freshman nursing student, sharing classes with young people who could be her children. Her own daughter, Janice, now on a full scholarship, excelled in her course and proudly spoke of her mother to everyone. One Sunday afternoon, while having tea on the veranda, Mrs. Celeste observed Nancy with affection. "You know, my dear, I always believed that people cross our paths for a reason. You came to this house as a maid, but you proved to be much more, a friend, a protector, almost a daughter." Nancy smiled, touched. "You also transformed my life, Mrs. Celeste. You taught me that dignity has nothing to do with social position or money, but with character, with the choices we make." "And speaking of choices," Marcus interjected, joining them, "I have news. The clinic is almost ready, and I want you, Nancy, after you graduate, to take over the coordination of the geriatric ward." The former domestic worker, now a university student and future nurse, felt a wave of gratitude and pride. From invisible hands that cleaned in silence, she would now be hands that cared, that protected. That made a difference. As the sun set over Bel Air, casting golden shadows over the royal palms, the three people on the veranda toasted not only to a new beginning, but to the strength of true human connections, those that transcend social positions, that withstand storms and that reveal in the end that those who observe in silence often see the most. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Nancy and Mrs. Celeste has touched your hearts. Just as Nancy found her worth and recognition, we believe that every person deserves to be seen beyond appearances. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Share in the comments if you have ever witnessed a situation where someone invisible to society's eyes became essential in another person's life. Every day we bring stories like this, which reveal the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Until the next story.